Sure. And
Okay, it looks like it's recording.
awesome.
Thank you.
No problem.
Oh, the things you learn when you are new to webinar software. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this ACRL Oregon webinar. I'm Meredith Farkas. I'm a librarian at Portland Community College and a member of the ACRL Oregon board. Right now, your microphone should be muted. Negin will be taking questions at the end of the session, and you can either unmute your microphone at the bottom of the screen and use that, or feel free to use the chat that should be at the bottom or the right-hand side of the page, depending on how your screen is set up. You can feel free to use the chat to ask questions as they come up. I'm going to collect all of the chat questions and I'll share them with Negin during the Q&A. I'll also monitor the chat for any problems folks are having using the webinar software. I'm not an expert in Zoom, but I've found that when you can't hear the speaker and you're sure the issue isn't your own computer, speakers, or headset, often leaving the webinar and popping back in can help. After this session, when the recording's ready, you're going to receive an email with a link to the recorded session as well as a session evaluation. We'd really appreciate it if you'd fill out the evaluation so we can continue to improve our offerings. Today's webinar is entitled Data Visualization: Who, What, When, Where, Why, How. Our presenter is Negin Agassabek, Data Visualization Librarian at the UW Health Sciences Library. Thank you so much, Negin, for sharing your knowledge with our community, and we look forward to learning from you. Thanks.
Thanks, Meredith. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you all about data visualization and what it might mean for you and your library. Before we get started, I just want to say that what I'm going to share with you today consists of some of my own definitions and judgments around data visualization. None of what I'm going to share here are like hard and fast rules. I don't think those really exist for visualization. And so I really encourage you, as you consider data and data visualization, to think critically about what you hear and what you're told. And if you have any questions or comments after this webinar, please feel free to just reach out. Or if you just want to talk about data visualization, I'm always happy to do that. And I'm going to try to keep this a little shorter, so in case anyone has any questions or discussion points they want to bring up at the end, we'll have enough time to do that. So let's get started with the who. So, in thinking about who can create data visualizations and who does it, I didn't really want to do the whole cheesy thing and say that anyone can create data visualizations and it's all great and fun and super. But, actually I kind of do believe that. Data visualization has become a sort of, hot topic in industry and libraries and academia. But I think sometimes data visualization is presented as a very technical activity, when in reality you can create data visualizations with some pen and paper. You can really invest as much or as little time, money, resources into data visualization as you want. And you really just need some data. And if you exist, you're creating and collecting data all the time. And your libraries are collecting and creating data all the time as well. And that really leads us into the next question, which is more, what is data visualization? And to answer this question, I think it would probably be best to show examples of what I consider to be data visualizations and what I don't think really qualify. And again, this is my definition, my judgments. I really encourage you to come to your own conclusions with it. And I could just say that data visualization is a graphical or a visual representation of information that helps you identify trends, outliers, and patterns, and that ability is particularly useful for large data sets. But I really think it would be more useful to show some concrete examples. So here's a pretty standard dashboard you might come across that combines a few different visuals of a data set that show the best places to retire based on a few different variables such as state, population, and weather. And I consider this to be a pretty standard data visualization. There are points on a map, it correlates to data and makes it easier to parse. We can imagine that this data set would be pretty large and maybe kind of complex. But not all data visualizations have to be this complex. If you haven't heard of Dear Data, and if you're interested in data visualization, I highly recommend you check out this book. It's also just this project created by Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Posavec, who over the course of the year sent weekly postcards to each other with some data they had collected that week in their own lives and that they had visualized. So here we can see the complaints that one of them had dealt with throughout 1 week, and they've separated them out by private complaints, outward complaints, and people complaining to them, along with the different categories of complaints, whether it's about the weather or animals or their husband or hunger. I would absolutely consider this a data visualization. It's just maybe not one you want to make at work, or maybe you do. Either way, I really like this project because it shows that data visualization doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be super complex. It doesn't require like 4 different screens and fancy tools that you have to pay a lot for. It can be relatively straightforward, simple with tools you already have, and it's something that we're often already collecting data for. You can even put it on a postcard if you really want. And so here's an example of something I don't consider to be a data visualization. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. When I made this, I didn't expect it to come off so snarky seeming. I didn't mean it to be like that. I just mean that, narrative text is not usually considered data visualization, of course, always with some exceptions. I'm borrowing here from Boston College Library's public Tableau profile to share what a library data visualization could look like. I appreciate that they took one concept, gate count, and they show it in a few different ways. So you can see here when traffic is coming in and out on the top right, which floor has the most traffic on the top left, the total gate count up at the top, and at the bottom you can even see which hours of the day have the highest gate counts by day of the week. This is an example of a type of visualization you could create for your library if you're collecting that data. Maybe this visualization can help you determine staffing levels at different times of the day, which floors you might want to renovate, or maybe it's just a data set you want to work with. Regardless, it's an interesting visualization to consider. And now let's turn over to the spreadsheet of Seattle pet adoptions. So this is not a data visualization. There's data, it is visual in that you can see it on the screen, but it's about as close as it gets to a data visualization. Let's say we're working with this data set and we want to identify all the goat and pig names in this data set. When we look at this visualization of that data set, which, by the way, I'd be happy to share out to anyone who's interested. At the moment, it just lives on my computer. We can filter out here cats and dogs, and we can focus on just goats and pigs, which helps us identify that in Seattle, there is a pig named Othello and a goat named Professor Nibblesworth, which just brings me so much joy. But, if I'd asked you to find the names of all the goats and pigs who are adopted in Seattle, it would take a few steps on a spreadsheet, and if you're skimming it really quickly, you might not even notice that it includes goats and pigs because they make up such a small proportion of the whole data set. And I think that raises another really important point of good data visualization work. It can identify marginalized or underrepresented peoples and places in your data sets, which is always an important thing to do and can be eased really by data visualization. So, I hope these examples have shown the range of data visualizations and have made the idea of creating data visualizations a little bit less daunting. Again, I really do encourage you to maybe spend a few minutes after this webinar making your own little visualization with some pen or paper, or if you want your favorite visualization tool, it can be something as simple as, the number of cups of water you've had today, how many steps you've taken every day this week, the number of times I've said during this presentation, whatever it is, right? Anything that you're collecting in your daily lives. And so now that you're maybe getting onto the data visualization train, it's important to figure out when you should visualize your data and when it actually might not be the best idea. Um, the first thing, most important thing really, I think, is do you have time to visualize and assess it? Depending on how messy your data is, it can be a major time investment to visualize it. Um, Working in libraries, I imagine most of us don't have infinite amounts of time and resources. So it's really important to think about whether or not the visualization you could create would actually be worth the time required to visualize it. But then, if it's a relatively clean data set, you might feel more comfortable throwing it into your favorite tool and making something. Also, I'm going to say clean and messy data a little bit throughout, but don't worry, I'm going to get to that at, closer towards the end. So some other things you'll need is a purpose. So, what questions are you trying to answer? What is your end goal? And, an audience. So are you making a fun visualization for your own learning? Or is it a request from your boss or funders or coworkers? Is it for a conference? And of course, you'll need a plan, even if it's just sort of informal. What types of data do you have? And what are the best chart types required to represent them? What variables do you need to make those charts? And do you have access to this data in a stable, usable format? And will you have access to this data throughout the project? And is there a chance that creating this visualization will cause some harm as well? There's a host of ethical questions and problems that we have to consider when we create data visualizations. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well, but it's again possible that the visualization you create might identify some people, especially if you're looking at survey data. It's just something else to consider when you're visualizing, and maybe some of the filters you use, or may think more critically about that work that you do. But once you get through these questions, hopefully you'll have a better sense of when it's a good idea to visualize the data you're working with, and when it's maybe better to let it live as a spreadsheet or in a database somewhere. And we're finally at the question of why. And we're all busy, have a million things to do and learn. So, it's why should we learn about data visualization? And I think there's a lot of these like obvious generic reasons, right? Like it makes it easier to communicate information, which is important if you're working with large data sets that are not super easy to read. It can allow for some deeper analysis, especially if you have multiple layers of data. And it can support data-driven decisions for programs and staffing and funding. And it can, data visualizations can really help make an argument for further support. But I think one issue with how data visualization has been introduced to libraries is that a lot of times maybe we're told it's important, but it can be hard to see it as, something other than a trend that we'll care about for a while. And maybe it'll die out eventually, and all it does now is sort of interfere with our actual work that we do. And ultimately, and again, I'm stressing here that's completely my judgment. If you decide that data visualization is not something that you're interested in or want to introduce to your library, that's completely okay too. Reference and instruction, all the other work that happens in libraries is equally important to you, if not more important than data and data visualization. But if you're interested, and if you're here today, I might assume that you're at least a little bit interested. I think there's space for data visualization in libraries through the form of data and visual literacies. So, big data is one of the new trends in industry, relatively new anyway. And personally, I'm just kind of hesitant in allowing them to monopolize that work. Libraries can question data visualizations, and we can teach students to question them as well. And we're in a position where we can try to demand greater transparency and attention to ethics in data visualizations. We can use data visualizations to push for social justice, and we can improve data literacy by teaching through visualizations. And and that's why I'm here, and that's kind of why I make learning more about data a priority for myself. Or you never know when you'll pull a Jon Snow and identify the cause of a cholera outbreak and save lives. And I really love this map because it's a great example of how data visualization can have a super significant impact. I don't think any of the work I do personally right now saves any lives, but it's nice to believe in the potential, right? So, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you so far, but this section is probably one of the more important ones to keep in mind. If you remember nothing else, just please remember some of these ethical and transparency issues. And, this really starts, at the beginning of the process, at the beginning of the data collection phase, and it ends with data visualization. So as you're going through, just be sure to represent your data accurately, maintain data integrity when cleaning. Don't misrepresent your data to achieve a preset goal, and be clear when there are problems and gaps in your data. I find it really helps to document any changes made to the original raw data set, whether it's a set of instructions on how you've prepped the data, or even if you can just, at least get a series of emails or something sent to your colleagues with the changes you've made to the original data source. And be sure you keep the language used to label and describe your visualizations representative of your data points. An example of this is, making sure that there isn't any narrative around a chart that might soften or highlight or in any other way misrepresent any undesirable data points, and just make sure the words you use represent the charts you're actually displaying. Follow some best practices while keeping in mind that the best practices have been developed within a certain context. And again, data visualizations can harm people, and it's important to think critically about both the process and the product. And create data visualizations that are accessible. And especially considering color and size and alt text. If you're interested in accessibility features of a specific tool, you can probably find discussions about it online and review a VPAT for the tool. I know Tableau in particular has a more I think in relative to some other tools I've checked out, has kind of a more active community around it, and I'm sure ArcGIS does as well. And a lot of what we've talked about so far applies to individual and team data visualization projects. But just, if you're working in a team, data and the visualization just might move through different hands. So, it's especially important in those situations to be aware that communication and transparency is really maintained throughout the project lifecycle. It just kind of is a little bit harder when you're working on a team. So just be clear, be sure to just pay a little closer attention in those scenarios. And here are some examples of data visualizations that very, very blatantly mislead. Most forms of data manipulation are more subtle, I think, and will require a bit more of a critical eye. But these are kind of interesting and fun to look at anyway. So on the left there, the gun deaths in Florida chart at a first glance appears to be a pretty standard line chart, and it shows a dip in gun deaths probably around like 2007. But a more careful look shows that the y-axis is actually upside down, meaning there's actually a spike in gun deaths in 2007. And the charts on the top right also have misleading y-axes, so the chart on the left does not start at 0. So that changes. The change of the years just seems a lot more dramatic, and the chart on the right only shows those really slight small changes, and it might be a better representation of the data. And again, not a hard and fast rule. If for example, you're trying to really just focus on the changes over the years, and even that small change has a really huge impact, maybe you don't want to start at 0. But if you make that decision, it's important to make it obvious and clear in your visualization and maybe justify it. And the pie chart on the bottom right, which is I think my personal favorite example, shows pieces of the pie chart adding up to over 100%. And most likely what happened in the scenario is respondents were able to select more than one candidate, but it's definitely still incorrect and misleading, right? And this visualization that I'm showing you now, it can be pretty useful and shows relationships between different groups in Syria. and you can actually hover over each icon to get more history of the relationships between them. But again, this is maybe a more subtle way. You have to look into it a little further because we don't know who is really making these determinations. How are they interpreting these relationships? It might obscure or oversimplify some information, which is, definitely in contrast to the previous slide. But, I'm not saying this visualization is necessarily wrong or misleading. It's just something I would definitely want to look into with some greater depth. And unfortunately, it's really hard, probably impossible to teach everything there is to know about data visualization in a short webinar. And honestly, I don't know close to everything there is to know about data visualization, and I'm still learning all the time. But as a result, I really recommend following these blogs and communities of practice to learn more. These are just a few blogs that I find useful and a couple communities of practice that I enjoy following. I think Makeover Monday in particular has a pretty engaged community, and I think it'll make it a little bit easier to get involved with that group. There are also some tool-specific sites and blogs, and you can definitely leverage online learning platforms to learn more. I've listed a few examples here, but there's really just endless amounts of blogs and articles about data visualization out there, and I recommend sifting through a few until you find one that really intrigues you. I think it's probably worth that time. And there's definitely information out there about accessible data visualization designs and practices. And I highly encourage you to read and implement, whatever you can to make your visualizations accessible. If you're interested in these links, by the way, they're going to be hopefully sent out with the evaluation as well once I get everything done and send it over to Meredith. So it might take a couple days, sorry. And, now we're at the biggest question, which is how should you visualize your data? And again, I can't teach every step here, but I think it's useful maybe to share some tools that can help get you started. So the first thing to note is that data preparation and cleaning is probably where you'll spend most of your time throughout the visualization process. So when you hear about messy data, it refers to data that a computer would not understand, or other errors in your data that are human-made, so typos or just categorization of data. For example, here, though we might understand that the word one written out represents the same as a numeric symbol, to a computer, they're completely different data types. DR period and DRIVE drive are the same to us, but not a computer. And the School of Public Health and SPH represent the same entity, but again, not the same. Other ways that we enter in data, I think in particular text or like strings here, they can be read in ways that we really don't intend by a machine. When I say messy data set, these are some of the examples that might be in your data set that make it a messy data set. And there's definitely a number of other issues that could pop up. But when you're wrangling a messy data set, I think it's important to just think like a machine, think like a computer, and use data preparation tools as much as possible. And there are some useful data preparation tools so you can more easily wrangle your data. And a popular open choice is OpenRefine. It has a lot of tutorials and a lot of training resources online. There's Trifactor Wrangler, which has both free and paid versions. But if all of this seems like too much, you can definitely still clean your data manually in Excel. Just keep in mind, it will take a little bit more time probably. I encourage you to maybe try one of the other tools, but personally, I use Excel or OpenRefine. Or if I'm lucky enough to have someone on a project with some programming skills, I can ask them to write a script that will reduce any manual cleaning. If I notice like a pattern of an error or something, it just is really helpful. But again, if you're working with a small data set and you're just not interested in learning any other tools, then Excel just might be what makes you happy, and that's totally okay. And here's a kind of short and sweet summary of some data visualization tools that are good at quantitative analysis. I've split them between free and not free versions. Some good tools that have free versions that require, little to no coding are Tableau Public, Data Wrapper, Plotly, and Raw Graphs. I think aside from Tableau Public, the rest of them you can just do in your browser. I'm forgetting about Plotly, to be honest, but Raw Graphs for sure. If you have a background in coding or up for more of a challenge, R and Python and JavaScript are some good options as well. And on the proprietary side, a commonly used tool is Excel, and technically it is a proprietary tool, but if you're working in a library, you might have access to Excel through your institution. And the other tools listed here are mostly just sort of the paid versions of the tools on the left, along with a couple of other options. But if you're worried about funding for tools to create data visualizations, there are definitely some quality free options to look into, I think. Though, I will warn you that some of these tools will require you to publish your work publicly. So just, please take care when you're visualizing any confidential or potentially identifying data that you might have to put it out to the public. And there's a number of geospatial visualization tools as well, both proprietary and open. Tableau has some mapping functionalities, but I think you might be better off using a tool specifically tailored for geospatial data. So ArcGIS, OpenStreetMaps are great options. And Python, of course. And I don't want to gloss over this topic because it's important, but we do have more ground to cover. So, if you have any further questions or you're working with a particularly gnarly geospatial data set, please feel free to reach out. And quantitative data is sometimes easier to visualize because it's easier to aggregate and find trends, but qualitative data can be a little bit more difficult. But I don't think that means we should just pass it off entirely. I think we get some really, really useful information through our qualitative data. And with sort of the big data trend, I think qualitative data is sometimes left out. But I really encourage you to look through your qualitative data and try to visualize it as well. The Qualitative Chart Chooser by Stephanie Evergreen has some really creative ideas on some visualizations. There's some more like analysis tools that have some visualization functionalities as well. So NVivo, Atlas TI, and Quirkos are some options there that might be useful for you, but they're mostly not free. But there's still ways to visualize qualitative data using tools like Microsoft Word, which you might already have access to. And this one, which I really like, it might even be able to be created in Paint if you're a Paint expert. All these visualizations are, different from each other, but I hope they kind of show there's ways to incorporate visualization into your own work. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's not impossible. And more than likely, you're kind of doing something like this already, or it's feasible to do something like this, right? So when thinking about this work, it's important also to consider the best ways to represent your data. The Data Visualization Catalog is another helpful resource that can help you choose a concept you're trying to implement in your visualization. And this is just like a small screenshot. There's so many more than just these options. And I think probably, honestly, the top couple rows are the ones you'll use most often. But in case you're working with some really unique data, it gives you ideas for that as well. And it actually gives you examples of the types of charts that might be the most suitable. It might be useful to refer to it during the planning and sketching stages to find the best chart types for your data. And quite honestly, I don't even know all of these chart types. And if you ask me to make you like a dot matrix chart right now, I would have to look into it for sure. But it's fun to kind of explore some of the possibilities and get creative. And bar charts are pretty solid. There's nothing boring about a bar chart, I think. And some of the more classic, I guess, more commonly used chart types are incredibly valuable still and can give you some really, really good data and really good insight into your data. And oh, I'm really sorry for the terrible quality screenshot. It's so tiny. But at least the link isn't too long. This Financial Times visual vocabulary poster summarizes some of the more popular chart types into one really neat package, which is really good as a quick reference if you're stumped with some data. Just another really good resource. Print it out, put it in your office, put it above your bed, put it wherever you do your visualization work, whatever makes you happy. But regardless, these are just kind of a couple tools where if you're just really, really stuck, it helps to look at what other people are doing and what some of your options are. And just as you're going through this, learning about creating data visualizations, I really like these words by Nathan Yao. A chart doesn't make something true. Data doesn't make something true. It bends. It shows many things. So keep your eyes open. And if y'all have any questions, again, feel free to email me. I'm sure Meredith will say this again, but please do the evaluation. And if you have any questions, comments, want to have a discussion, even if it's something really specific, I'm really happy to do that now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Negin. That gave us a lot of interesting food for thought. Everyone, you're welcome to ask questions via the chat, or you can turn on your mic and ask a question that way as well. And if we don't get any, I know I have a few that I've thought of while listening to this.
Sure.
All right, well, while people perhaps type things in, maybe I'll do one of mine. I was just thinking about messy data and how that has sort of been the bane of my existence when I've done anything like surveys or whatever, and like you get the data and you're like, oh, why did I set it up this way or ask questions? Are there like, I don't know, books or websites or any sort of like best practices for creating forms so you don't end up with like in our instruction form, we get people writing, like we ask for them to give the amount of time they want the class in minutes. And so we get like people writing out 1 hour and you're like,
Yeah, I think I've read through some blogs and other things because I run into this problem all the time where I'm like, I can't believe I didn't think about this one problem and now it's going to take me hours and hours to fix it in my data.
Yeah.
One thing that I've tried to do more now is if I have like an online survey form or something, if the tool I'm using has this has a capability to do this, is just limiting the types of data that can be entered makes a huge difference. Like not everything has to be a text box. You can actually require people to just like put in only numeric values, and that has actually made a bit of a difference for me personally. Or one other thing that I'm still trying to get more into the habit of doing is I tend to work with a lot of the same types of data, survey data in particular. So anytime I encounter a problem, I actually have this running like Word document, and I just go in and I'm like, okay, so with this data set, here's this problem that I ran into, and this is how I decided to fix it, but it took this many hours to fix it. Or I estimate it took like 2 weeks, except for I was on vacation for 3 days, just like my own notes of how I went about it. And so when I run into that problem again, which I probably will at some point, I kind of have a reference, or maybe if I'm smart enough, it'll help me prevent making that mistake in the future. But yeah, I also have a couple of like articles I think are useful, so I can actually add that to the PowerPoint and share that with everybody.
Oh, fabulous. Because yeah, if that's the piece that takes the most time often, it's like whatever you can do in designing the tool that's collecting data, it seems like that, like put effort into that. And I have so many times like kicked myself for like how I asked a question or how I let people enter data, and
I'm on the same boat.
We all are. So Amy Hoffer wrote a comment. She said, "I'm interested to hear you stick up for bar charts since that's the kind of visualization I use most. Thanks for the validation."
Yes, I use bar charts more than any other chart, almost definitely. They're
I
a
think,
great way.
yeah, and I think with tools like this, you can get very like, ooh, I want to create something interesting and esoteric because it's like
Mhm.
new to you
Mhm.
and everything. That sort of yeah, and that getting into the hype of the tool, and yeah, sometimes the
Mhm.
simplest thing is is
Communicates the best, and that actually reminds me of a couple of like data visualization big people in industry have their own blogs, and I remember I'm going to try to find again, it's like something like in defense of bar charts or something, and it just talks about how like just like scientifically the way that we perceive things, bar charts are a lot easier for us to understand than like bubble charts or pie charts, because we're just a lot better at understanding the differences between lengths instead of sizes. Our eyes just don't trick us as much. So
yeah,
usually it's a better way of representing data anyway. So happy
sure.
to share those too.
Yeah, I know when my previous library did LibQual for the first time, and like trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand, I can't remember what that type of chart is called, where like,
Yes.
oh, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like a circle and you have all these different like pieces come. Oh, I just found it so amazingly confusing, and I'm like, couldn't they have done this as like a bar chart with like different bars for like perceived value
Mm-hmm.
and want the value they wanted, but no,
Mm-hmm.
no, they just
Yeah.
make it so hard for
Yeah.
anyone to read.
And it's like, if it's so complicated to try to interpret, then, it sort of defeats the purpose of visualizing it in the first place, doesn't it? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm all for bar charts.
Nice. All right. Are there any other questions that folks have? I've got another one, but I will pause for a minute to see if others want to take the mic. All right. Well, I guess then I will ask my other question. I know a lot of people are doing really cool things with Tableau these days, like even our institutional effectiveness folks, which are like our internal research unit at PCC, like they're doing all these cool data visualizations so we can see like equity gaps and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What I was wondering what the differences are between like the free version of Tableau, that public version, and the one you have to pay for. Is it
Mm-hmm.
significant?
So functionally, they're actually more or less the same. There's like a couple of small differences. I think the real big difference to keep in mind is that whenever you're using Tableau Public, it's totally free, but not exactly, because when you publish your data visualization, you have to publish to their server, which means anyone can look um, on their search for your visualization or whatever on the Tableau public gallery and find it. So if you're working with survey data, if you're working with any other confidential data, I would not use Tableau public at all.
Right.
I think it's really great as a practice tool because they have some of their own visualizations and their own data sets. Sorry, embedded in the program. So they have I think it's like Superstore data that you can just open up Tableau Public and use that data and learn with it. So
Oh, cool.
it's really great for that. Um, there are like ways of trying to maybe if it's on the public site to maybe make it less findable, but it still exists, right? So that's the key difference. And then there's a couple of like small, nothing that actually I think makes a really significant difference. Like you can add in certain certain tools to your dashboards that are only available on like desktop and server, but honestly, they're so small I don't even really remember them right now. So that's
Sure.
if you want to really, really get into it.
Cool. Wow, thank you. Yeah, I've been really wanting to try out Tableau, and
hmm
yeah, it's definitely on my list of my long list of things
Yeah, and
to play with.
lynda.com, or now it's I think LinkedIn Learning or something,
Mhm.
has a Tableau like 10 essentials, like 10 things you need to do essentials list
Oh,
class.
wow.
Yeah, it's a really great class, and it uses, if I'm not mistaken, and it's been a year or two since I've done it, but it uses the Superstore data that sort of Tableau itself teaches with their classes and stuff. So super useful.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So Amy has an additional question. She was wondering, do you have suggestions for showing comparisons over time when there are lots of items crowding the x-axis? Oh, good question.
That's a really good question, and I still have moments where I struggle with it. I think, don't be scared to have multiple visualizations, like multiple line charts. And, you know, if you are able to do something more interactive, like on Tableau, it helps to, add in filters. So you can sort of categorize different fields. I don't know what specifically you're looking at, but, if you're looking at, for example, um, gate count and uh, I don't know, Wi-Fi usage and computer usage and like study space occupancy, like if you use those as categories and create them, like create a filter using those, it could be useful. You can even create filters in Excel too. Yeah, and that usually helps kind of tidy it up a little bit. Or just create separate line graphs for them. It sounds like such an easy way out, but the purpose of it is to be readable. So hopefully that helps. I'm sorry if you're already doing those things and want other solutions, but those have been my solutions so far.
Yeah, Amy says it's helpful. In her case, she's the open um, Open Oregon, so like open education, and she's
hmm
often doing charts that show Oregon 17 community colleges and OER adoption
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff. So,
Yes.
there are too many.
Yes, that's a lot. I think I really for that it's probably like just using filters, and maybe if you can like group them by region or something and
Mm.
separate them out that way might be another idea. Or like if if you do it and you notice like like these like 4 out of the 17 have like really big changes in like 2017, like grouping them that way might be another idea. Um, yeah, sorry, that's always hard to do.
Oh, those are cool ideas. Um, Gabrielle has a comment. She said for her 2 cents, Tableau is an expensive program that doesn't help with data cleaning. She recommends R for libraries because it helps with both data cleaning and visualization. Either that or Excel, which can do a
hmm
surprising amount of data visualization. And I was really interested to hear both you and she recommend Excel because we think of it as such an unsexy piece of software because we all have it and mostly hate it.
I think Excel's come a long way though. It's definitely not, but it's like I think Tableau does like super fancy like I don't know, the super fancy visualizations is a
Sure.
new sort of like hot tool, but I use Excel so much for so many things. And like you can build filters, you can build like dashboards in it, and um I think part of the reason why we think that is maybe because like we remember the ones from like years ago, like with the 3D visualizations or whatever. But you really can try to mimic some of the stuff you can do in Tableau and Excel as well. And R is another great tool. I mean, I don't usually talk about it a lot because
Mhm.
I think, when we're new, if you're new to data visualization, maybe you don't want to start with coding, and that's totally fine. And
Right.
I'm still learning, but it's, again, like you're totally right. Like free tools are great. And a couple of the other ones I mentioned, like raw graphs and data wrapper, you can do those in browser, and they have their own sample data sets too. So if you're just really looking to test it out for 5 minutes, it's a pretty low time investment
Oh, that's
tool.
awesome.
hmm
And Amy has another question. While I'm selfishly asking lots of questions, any comment on Excel versus Google Sheets? Oh, that's a great question too.
Mm, yeah, well, it's funny. I don't think I ever really used Google Sheets for visualization now that I think about it. I use it more for like collaborative projects. And a lot of times we're just storing that data and moving it somewhere else. So
Mhm.
I don't have a great answer for you. I'm sorry, Amy.
I know I've had problems with getting like really big data sets, and in my case, it's just like collection data that I've
Mm-hmm.
gotten from Alma
Mm-hmm.
Analytics into Google Sheets. Like it will just freak out and
Mm-hmm.
won't work, and like I'll have to use Excel for larger data sets. I am totally like a super novice at doing any like real analysis with either, so I couldn't say that, but I do know Google Sheets seems to have problems with very large spreadsheets.
Yeah, I've kind of run into the same thing. So I use it, like I said, just like when collaborating. Like, if your concern is collaboration, and maybe if you have access to like OneDrive or something, or similar sort of tool, like having Excel online might not be a bad idea if you're sharing with others. Um, in defense of Google Sheets, this is something new that I learned recently from one of my other colleagues is you can insert like pictures or icons into each cell of Google Sheets. So if, for example, you're like doing a visualization where you're doing like a bar chart and you want each like let's just say I'm doing a bar chart of like how many cups of water I've had to drink today, right? And I want to use like a little water cup icon or something. It'll actually evenly space that out for you within each cell. So it's kind of nice for that sort of work.
Oh, that's cool. Wow,
Yeah.
y'all are gonna make me want to get better at Excel and Google Sheets this year. I can't even make a pivot chart. Like, any other questions from folks or comments, thoughts? I'll give folks another minute to see if
Yeah,
anything comes
no
up.
rush. And again, I'll be sure to get all these links together and send them over. I didn't want to overwhelm you all with links for the webinar, though I think I did a little bit, sorry. But there are some really cool articles to read about sort of more of the science behind data visualization and why certain charts might work better. And so I'll be sure to get those all added too and send them over.
No, this was great. As somebody who has really only done stuff with like infographics tools pretty
Hmm.
much, and I found this so helpful and, just getting my thinking together on what I could do.
I'm glad. Good. Yeah, it really can be fun, and like Dear Data is such a great example of how data visualization can be fun and personal. And
Yeah.
so I've run into like data visualization art too, where people are combining, poetry and narrative with visuals. And so anyway, a lot of cool
Right.
stuff.
Yeah, I like the stuff about qualitative because I mean, when I
Hmm.
think about, like how do we tell the library's story in a way that's compelling and
Yes.
like, gate counts are vaguely interesting, but you want to get like you want to pair that with like what are people actually doing in the library and like what
Yes.
are they saying about what they're doing and how it matters to them, and like putting all that together I think is such a complex and also interesting kind of fun challenge.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I love do my best with qualitative data as well.
Yeah, yeah, that was neat. I never really thought about how to represent that, so that was good to hear that others are thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, I think we will close the webinar now. I'll be sending you an email probably on Tuesday with a link to the archived webinar recording as well as resources Negin had shared with us. So be ready for that. A treasure trove of information. And yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day and a great weekend. And thank you so much, Nagin, for really sketching out some of the basics of data visualization for us.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
And I'll stop recording if that's okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just figured out how to get posting.